Hello.
Good evening.
Evening.
Welcome, foolish mortals, to the haunted Rick stream.
How are
That's
you
my
all?
entire introduction.
No, wait. How are you all booing tonight?
I was gonna say dooming, but that also works. Yeah, how are you? How are you all spooking tonight? Haha. Crypt Keeper.
Yeah. How
Thank
are
you
you
all.
dead skeleton ghosts screaming? Anyway.
I hope you brought your creepy mask and your creepy slasher weapons and whatnot.
How are you all nilbogging tonight?
Alright. Okay.
Thank you all for joining us once again in the annals of Spoop. We once again bring this session of the Midnight Society to order. To
I'm not
begin!
gonna say what I'm thinking about your use of the word annals. Go on.
To begin, Miffix has a story to regale us with, does she not?
Well, oh, wait a second. Am I first on the chopping block already?
Well, I went last time when we go down the list, so I guess that makes you. Are you ready? Do you have something?
Give me just a second. I'll go pull it up. I do have one that I'm looking forward to doing.
The real horror is being put on the spot.
also having to make phone calls to order pizza. You know, it's terrifying.
It is pretty terrifying.
I want pizza now.
Unless Superman's
I'm
one
sorry.
putting a spotlight.
Wait, where do you have to call to get pizza? Why would you not just do it online?
Okay, so most of it you can do online, thankfully.
Yeah. I was gonna say, even my local pizza place that doesn't have their own website, I can still get them through, like, DoorDash.
And then the horrible plot twist. The pizza was coming from inside the house!
It was a DiGiorno!
30 minutes or less, or you're dead.
Alrighty, I did find it.
Oh, goody.
Hey.
Something, I have something to bring to the Midnight Society. How does it go again?
Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society.
Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. I would like to read you. My grandmother was murdered for a tea set. Written by Micah Edwards.
I want to go to Zealots.
It was tradition. Ever since my grandmother's vision had gotten too bad for her to drive, every Sunday, I'd take her downtown for whatever shopping she needed to get done. We'd been doing it for years, but for whatever reason, when she picked up the phone each Sunday, she acted like my call was a total surprise.
Oh, nice to hear from you. No, I don't really need anything. Well, if you're going anyways.
I don't know why she was like that, but she was. Until about a month ago, anyways. I called her like usual, and she barely even waited for me to finish saying hello before she told me she wanted to go to Zealots. Sure, Grandma, what's Zealots?
Dolores went last week, and she's been cooing about it ever since.
Turn that off. She was out with her great-granddaughter and brought her some sort of doll.
That she's just in love with. Madison, I mean, though Dolores is in love with it too. But Doris says that the whole shop was just a treasure, and honestly, I'm sick of hearing her say you should go see it.
Well, then, let's go see it. Do you know where it is?
No, but we can ask Doris when you get here.
I'll just look it up online, Grandma. There is no such thing as a short conversation with Doris, and if she was half as enamored with this shop as my grandmother seemed to think she was, then if we stopped to talk, we'd be there at least an hour. I intended to avoid Doris completely until the trip home, at least, where I could fake another commitment and flee if I had to. She was a sweet lady, but talking could go on for hours. The independent living community had tons of women like that. Zealots turned out to be just down in the old warehouse district, which provided cheap floor space for all sorts of businesses, from breweries to rug wholesalers. It didn't have a website, but a couple of local reviews described it respectively as a charming collection of oddities and a delightful maze of vintage treasures, which told me about what to expect from the place. Nearly, anyways. The first thing that I noticed when we walked in was that the place was enormous. Tall shelves divided the cavernous space into winding aisles, intersecting and ending apparently at random. If there's a plan to its layout, I sure couldn't see it. Grandma was delighted from the moment we walked in. "Oh, look at what they have," she exclaimed. Making a beeline for one aisle's end cap, she picked up a china figurine of an angel and showed it to me. "Isn't it adorable?" I've never been really much for quiches, but I smiled. It really is Grandma. She replaced the fragile statue and drifted down the aisle. I followed in her wake, nodding appreciatively and making noises of appreciation for each item she held up for my appraisal. I didn't really get it, but I hadn't seen her this animated in years, so I was loving it. We'd been in there for an hour or more before she found the tea set. "Oh, look at this," she declared. Her tone was different than it had been, a bit lower, more possessive, maybe? It was enough to sharpen my attention, certainly, to pull me out of the fog of yeses and mhms that I'd been uttering up till now. So I looked, as she demanded. It was, as I said, a tea set. A delicate one made of bone china, with intricate patterns of vines and flowers twining around the rims of the cups and bowls. It was certainly a marvel of craftsmanship, and lovely as far as these things go, but it was just a tea set, the sort of thing you put in your cupboard and ignore for years on end. Grandma felt differently about it, clearly. She approached it with almost a reverent look on her face, plucking a cup from its stand with the sort of care usually reserved for handling newborn kittens. "Oh, this is beautiful," she'd breathed, turning it over in her hands. She turned to me. "Will you carry this up front for me?" I blinked. I'd never known my grandmother to make an impulsive purchase in her life. I'd seen her dither for 5 minutes over what brand of canned beans to buy. I knew that she was on a fixed income, and this was a full tea set with cups, saucers, servers, and all. "Are you sure, Grandma?" I asked, leaving unspoken the last part. "Are you sure you can afford this?" I would have offered to buy it for her, but honestly, I wasn't sure I could afford it either. I figured a set like this had to be a few $100s minimum, more if it had any sort of vintage value. She nodded and answered the question that I hadn't quite asked. "Look, they're practically giving it away." She held up a small handwritten tag affixed to the teapot, which read only $25. Maybe that's just for the I began, but she was already turning the tag over. On the reverse in the same handwriting was "for set." "Wow," I said, impressed. "Shoot, let's get 2. Grandma gave me a bit of a glare. "This is clearly one of a kind." I shut up before I said anything else stupid. We made our way to the front of the store, Grandma still examining various items on the shelves, me staring intently at the clinking, teetering miscellany in my arms to make sure nothing slipped and I broke it ahead of time. When we finally reached the front, I set the whole collection down with relief. "Oh, a lovely choice," said the unctuous little man behind the counter. "That was absolutely one of my favorite finds." Grandma smiled. "You have a beautiful store here, mister." "Oh, call me Thaddeus, and thank you. I just have such a love of collecting. If I didn't run the store, I'm sure I'd be one of those hoarders they make television shows about these days."
"This is not hoarding. Your collection is wonderful. And this!"
Grandma indicated the tea set. "Well, I'm glad I found you. Shall I wrap it up?" He reached for the teapot. His motions were as smooth as his voice, almost unnaturally so. Have you ever watched a movie shot at 48 frames per second instead of the standard 24? It's too smooth, too clean. It ends up looking sort of uncanny. That was how Thaddeus moved and spoke, like he had more frames than the rest of us. When he reached out for the teapot, my grandmother flinched. I saw her start to reach out as well, then restrain herself.
"Yes, please do,"
she said, a hint of strain in her voice.
"We certainly wouldn't want anything to happen to it."
"Oh, bone china is very durable," Thaddeus assured her, his hands swiftly wrapping each piece of the set in 2 smooth motions. "This set might as well live us all." He produced an attractive gift box from behind the counter and carefully nestled each piece inside, then rang us up on the register. As promised by the tag, the cost was only $25. I was astonished. I'd still been expecting there to be some mistake. But if Thaddeus was happy with the price he was getting, I certainly wasn't going to convince him to charge my grandmother more.
I'm bringing this out for book club.
Grandma announced on the ride home. The box was settled snugly in her lap, her arms wrapped protectively around it. I'd offered to put it in the trunk, but she insisted it might slide around and it would be safer with her.
They're going to be so jealous.
So, Doris was right about Zelotes. Grandma snorted.
All she got was that doll for her granddaughter. She'll be kicking herself when she sees this. Serves her right for not looking around carefully enough.
It's a really big store, Grandma. Maybe she just picked the wrong aisle.
No loss.
Grandma sounded smug, almost gleeful. She's still gonna get to use it at the book club, right?
Yes, absolutely. But I'll still own it.
Internally, I shrugged. I knew that the politics ran deep in that community, and I mainly just stayed out of it. This was clearly some sort of game of one-upmanship that I'd never seen or before wandered into. If Grandma was happy, I was happy. That was the end of it. That was the last time I ever saw Grandma. I spoke to her that Monday night, the night of the book club. She called me to talk afterwards, as she often did when she had opinions that differed from the other people in the club. So how was book club, Grandma? I asked.
Oh, the tea set was such a hit, she told me, practically crowing. Everyone loved it.
Okay, but the book?
And Doris was so mad. Did you get that at Zelotes? Where was it? I didn't see it.
So the tea set, huh?
I think it even made the tea taste better. I swear I haven't had tea that flavorful in years. It's the ritual of it all. It really adds to it.
I'm glad you're happy, Grandma.
Can we go back this Sunday? We can take Doris this time. It'll give her a chance to find something. She'll go into a complete sulk otherwise.
Absolutely, Grandma. Let me know if anyone else wants to go, and I'll bring out the SUV.
Oh, don't be ridiculous. None of us can climb up into that old thing. It'll just be me and Doris. Everyone else can find their own way there.
The next Sunday morning, though, I called like usual. The routine started off the same way as always.
Oh, how nice to hear from you. No, I don't really need anything. Oh, if you're going anyways.
The usual routine. But she never quite got to the well if you're going anyways part of it, and after a couple minutes, I just flat out said, Grandma, I'm going to the grocery store. Do you want to come along?
No, she told me. I'm just going to stay home today, I think.
What about going to Zelotes? I thought you and Doris wanted to go back.
I don't think I'm going to go out today. I'm just going to stay here.
Are you feeling all right?
Oh, yes, I feel fine. I just don't trust some of the people around here.
Okay, do you need me to bring you anything?
Well, if you're going anyway.
A trip to the store later. I was toting 2 full grocery bags down the hall to Grandma's apartment. The door was ajar, so I nudged it open with my foot. I started to call out, but my voice died in my throat. Grandma was lying on her back in the middle of the room, arms held feebly above her. Blood was spurting from both forearms and chest, a lurid red against her right rug. Straddling her, striking viciously downward, was Doris. She was coated in blood from the kitchen knife and screaming incoherently, the knife flashing outward with a mind of its own. Stop! I shrieked, the groceries spilling to the floor. I raced into the apartment and hurled Doris aside. Her head impacted the TV stand and she crumpled to the ground. I was not paying attention to her. My eyes were on my grandmother, my hands wrapped desperately around her forearms, pressing them to her chest in an attempt to stop the bleeding.
Don't,
she coughed, whispering out the word. I'm sorry, Grandma. I know it hurts. I'm sorry. I have to. Help! Help! She shook her head weakly. She coughed again.
Don't what? Don't let her have the tea set.
Those were her final words to me. The staff came thundering down the hall, practiced hands pulling me away, applying bandages, calling 911. It was too late, though. Too late for my grandmother, and too late for Doris, who had died in the corner while my grandmother choked out those final words. I sat on the couch, bloody and shocked, while the paramedics came, while curious heads poked around the door frame, while the police arrived and cordoned off the scene. I told them I had no idea of why Doris did it. I told them that they had been friends, that it didn't make any sense. I didn't mention the tea set because it was just a stupid tea set. She might have been obsessed with it, but that obviously wasn't what this was about. So I believed anyway. But we had the estate sale last week. All of my grandmother's jewelry and clothes and belongings out for the world to pick through. I went by at one point to see how it was going, and a number of the folks from her community were there. They were polite. They all greeted me and expressed condolences and all of the usual niceties, but every single one of them had the same question. Where's the tea set? They wouldn't accept "I don't know" as an answer either. Further questions followed. Did your parents take it? Do you have it? Did she give it to someone already? Who has it? The look in their eyes was desperate, vicious. I made my excuses and left before it got any worse. I don't know who has a tea set. My parents don't. They never even knew about it. I'd assume that someone in my grandmother's building took it, except that all of the people she associated with were at the estate sale looking for it. The day she was murdered, when I showed up at her apartment, the tea set was on the table. I remember it. I remember seeing it. The image of her murder is fixed clearly in my mind like a painting, and just past her flailing arms to the left of Doris's knife, the tea set plainly there on the table. But when I left the apartment, when I stood up from the couch where I'd been sitting for hours, I had a brief moment of dizziness. I steadied myself until it passed. I put my palm flat on the table where I brought my balance. The empty table. There was no tea set there. The whole episode is a blur. I remember the opening scene distinctly, and then it's just blood and flashing lights and an endless parade of faces. So many people came in and out of view while I sat on the couch and stared and cried. And in there, in the middle of it all, was the one person who moved smoothly through the crowd, too smoothly, who glided in as if he belonged, and removed the tea set. There were so many faces, so many blurs, I can't recall. Zelos doesn't show up on a web search anymore. The warehouse downtown is vacant. Doris and my grandmother are dead, and I don't think I'll ever know the truth. Ta-da.
Man,
Oh.
spill the tea, fam.
Okay.
I adore how, like, y'all, like, you get, like, a one-liner, like, set up for it. Bless.
Stoker's the king of those.
Where can I get that tea set?
No.
Well, you have to.
No,
You have to
no.
make a deal
no,
with.
no.
You have to make a deal with Tielzebub.
Yeah,
Oh my god. See, Stoker thinks that he's like on the fly. I usually think of him about an hour after the fact. I'll be like, I should have said, you know,
Of course, you can't
Yeah,
think
you
of anything
definitely
now.
should have said.
yeah. Anyway, that was good, Miffix. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun.
Oh man, thanks for bearing with the rocky start on it. I was like, and let's go.
Hey, listen. That's how the cookie crumbles.
We're warming
tea
up to
cake
spooky
is-
juices,
is-
you know.
You're no, she said spooky juices,
Oh,
but
spooky
I like the idea.
I heard Scooby juices. I'm like,
That's the liquid form of Scooby snacks, in case anybody asks.
all right.
So I guess it's Miller's
Miller,
turn
yeah.
next.
Yeah.
All right.
For the approval of the Menace Society, I have the story called Dad Shut Himself Inside His Bunker at the Start of the Pandemic. 3 months ago, we lost contact with him. Dad shut himself inside his bunker at the beginning of 2020. He said the world was about to end, and when we didn't believe him, he told us to wake up. It was raining that day. I remember focusing on the water hitting the window panes when my sister tried to change Dad's mind. I knew it was no use. He was too stubborn to listen to anyone except maybe Donald Trump. The World Health Organization had just declared that COVID-19 had pushed the world into a pandemic. Dad wanted us to join him, and when we told him no, he called us brainwashed. He purchased the land before I was born, only because of the dilapidated military facility that came with it. It was abandoned sometime in the 60s, I think. My sister was there from the beginning, even before Dad's obsession pushed Mom away. It's hard for me to imagine what he was like back then. Mom says he was a gentleman. But they married young, and a person can change a lot during those years. And so did Dad. All I remember from him during childhood are the weekends at the bunker, constantly renovating it and stockpiling it with everything he would need to survive down there. We couldn't stop him. He wasn't the best dad, not even a good one, but it was sad to see him go all the same. He was excited, even though he thought that civilization was about to collapse. I guess that's what happens when you spent your entire adult life preparing. We had to set up an old radio to keep in touch with him. He didn't trust mobile phones. We didn't hear from him often, just once a month, sometimes less. The last time he radioed in, he said he had found a hidden door. He was going to see where it went. That was 3 months ago. You think he's okay? My sister said. He wasn't in great health. I told him. We sat in the car on our way to check up on him, driving through the heat wave. His radio might have broken down, I said. Let's not assume the worst. But I felt worried too. There was something strange about that hidden door in his tone when he mentioned it. It didn't sit right with me. But maybe it was just the heat and the endless desert around us that played tricks on my mind. I couldn't really tell. It was dark when we arrived. Dad's truck stood where he had left it beneath some tarp that blew in the chilly, sand-carrying wind. We turned on our flashlights and walked to the cliff above the bunker. The steel door was made to withstand a nuclear blast. Luckily, I owned the only spare key in existence. Before I used it, I banged on the door as hard as I could and yelled for Dad. I worried he would mistake us for intruders and shoot us. If he was confused, and if it was dark, it was a real possibility. I banged again and yelled at the top of my lungs. Dad, are you in there? It's me, Josh! Evelyn is here as well! I don't think he can hear you, Evelyn said. I nodded. Dad, I'm gonna open the door now. I was 17 the last time I was here. Back then it was the Muslims that were going to end civilization as we knew it. Before that, it was the Russians. Now it was China. There's always something threatening his beloved freedom, and yet he was never truly free. My sister put her hand on my wrist just as I was about to unlock the door. You know, she said, maybe we should just call the authorities after all, and... No, I said, he'll fight them. I unlocked the heavy door. A rancid smell escaped the darkness inside. It was the odor of death. I recognized it from when Dad tried, and ultimately failed, to learn how to hunt and let a reindeer carcass rot on the property for weeks. My sister had already stopped visiting him by then. I didn't tell her what the smell reminded me of. She covered her nose with her shirt. We descended the spiral stairs. It creaked for each step we took, almost as if it was about to fall apart. I tried the light switch at the bottom. The click echoed throughout the long corridor leading to the living area. Nothing happened. I realized that the batteries, which he charged by the use of an old exercise bike, were dead. That meant he was most likely dead as well. The generator could be broken, I said, but maybe you should wait back here, just in case. You know. I pointed my flashlight in front of me. The light was too weak to reach the end of the corridor. On the way here, I had felt already. I felt sad. The kind of empty sadness you feel after the death of a parent that was never any good, but I didn't feel worried. On the other hand, while staring into the dark corridor that I used to run through as a kid, I was afraid. The fear reminded me of how my childhood night terrors used to start. They always crept up to me in the darkness, grew with the grotesque shadows on my bedroom ceiling. I'm not letting you go in there alone, Evelyn said. We stay together. We walked into the darkness. The foul smell intensified for every step we took, and so did my heartbeat. I was glad my sister didn't stay behind. The bunker seemed so much smaller than I remembered it. It's much more cramped. The asymmetry between my memories and the reality made everything feel off somehow, just as if the bunker were merely a model of the real thing. But it wasn't. I had just grown up. The Confederate flag greeted us at the end of the corridor. It hung on the concrete wall. It looked pale in the hot spot of the flashlight, almost like a phantom. And of course, in many ways it was. A ghost from a long time ago. Or perhaps a corpse brought back to life. An abomination. It reminded me of Dad more than anything else. You have to be seriously confused to praise freedom as much as Dad and hang that symbol of lesser freedom in the world on your wall, Evelyn said. He wanted to protect his freedom so much that he built a prison for himself. I removed the light from the flag, leaving only darkness. You bet he was confused. We entered the main chamber. It was overfilled with litter and clutter. Empty cans, both of food and beer kinds, lay scattered across the sticky floor. We had to take large steps not to step on any of the trash. That's weird, Evelyn pointed her flashlight at the small dining table. Look! My hair stood up on my neck before I even realized what she meant. The table was set for 3 people. I didn't say anything for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. And just when I was about to speak, my sister interrupted me. Who the fuck was here with him? We don't know, I began. I mean, he might have left the old plates on the table and... A sound of something falling to the ground came from one of the other rooms further into the bunker. I pointed my light in its direction, but couldn't see what made it. Dad! I yelled. It's me, Josh! You there? No response. I'm afraid, Evelyn whispered. Something isn't right. I only vaguely heard what she said. My focus was on something else. Something on the wall on the other end of the room. That's not supposed to be there. I slowly walked toward it. That must have been what he talked about over the radio. Dad had hacked away a layer of concrete for whatever reason and uncovered a rusty metal door behind it. It stood ajar. A lukewarm, musty breeze came out of it. My sister walked up to me as I carefully pried the door open with the back of my flashlight. I felt my heart in my throat. I could hear my sister begging for us to leave, almost in tears. But I needed to know what was behind that door. It was imperative to understand what had happened here. I needed to know. I needed closure. What in heaven's name? Evelyn looked over my shoulder. Why is this here? Behind the door was a room about the size of a broom cupboard. It was unremarkable except for a circular hole in the middle of the floor. I shone my light into it, but I couldn't see the bottom. Just as I thought it was big enough for a person, my sister said, Do you think he fell? Drops of sweat from my forehead fell down the pit. I felt dizzy and stepped back, afraid I would fall inside. My sister picked up a can filled with some rotten beans and threw it down the hole. It clattered against the walls as it bounced from one side to the other. The sound faded away until we couldn't hear it anymore. There was no indication it touched down at the bottom. I stretched out my hand and held it above the opening. It's warm, I said. The air, I mean. Maybe he fell. Evelyn stepped back almost as if she were convinced. Can we please get out of here? She reached for my arm. We can return with the police. Please, Josh? It wasn't dark when Dad found this, I said. He would have seen the hole. Josh, please. Just give me a moment to think. I walked toward the hallway that led to the other rooms, desperately hoping to find him. For some reason, it was important for me to see him, to be able to leave without wondering. I needed to know that he was truly dead. I stopped myself after I accidentally put my flashlight on the floor in the middle of the hallway, revealing a pair of feet. I think I found him! I ran up to the body. Wait! Evelyn yelled and reluctantly followed me to avoid being left alone. It wasn't Dad. I screamed upon the realization. My mind couldn't comprehend what I had just seen. I spun around and tried to run away, completely acting on instinct, and crashed into my sister. She grabbed me, kept me still, and as she looked behind me, down at the dead body on the floor, she began to cry while her hands trembled uncontrollably against my shoulders. Oh my god, she said. How is this possible? It's you! Let's get the fuck out of here, I said. Move! There was nothing that could explain this, and the more my mind tried to, moving into an endless loop doing so, the dread grew inside me. I only got a glimpse of the body before I panicked. My sister was right. The half-rotten face was the same as mine, with a bullet hole in the middle of the forehead. We stumbled our way through the living area, tipping over chairs and kicking cans all over the place. And just as we were about to get out of the mess, a familiar voice echoed through the hallway we had just escaped. Josh! It was Dad. We both stopped in our tracks. Is that you? Josh? Dad? I yelled back. What the fuck is going on here? Don't worry! It sounded like he was at the other end of the bunker, possibly inside the storeroom. I killed the son of a bitch! Put a bullet right between his eyes! Come out from there, I yelled. We have to leave. It's not safe here. Silence. Something is wrong, Evelyn said. I don't think... Dad! I yelled. Come out! I can't move! Dad said. I'm stuck under a shelf. I'll need your help, son! I turned to my sister. Go back up. I'll get that old bastard out of here. We'll be right behind you, okay? Think, Josh, Evelyn begged. You think he's been stuck under a shelf for... I should have listened, but even after what we had just seen, I couldn't bring myself to even consider something as outlandish as what my sister was suggesting. It was simply too far-fetched, too unbelievable to penetrate all my layers of presumptions about reality. It couldn't be. It just couldn't. Hence, I ran back to the hallway, yelling for my sister to get back to the surface and wait for us there. I'm coming, Dad! I only slowed down to carefully step over the corpse that bore my face. Perhaps, I thought, it was just a coincidence. A burglar that just happened to look like me. After all, the face had begun to rot. It wasn't obviously me. I felt stupid, and I almost convinced myself that it was just my childhood fear of the dark coming back to life down here. And then, just as I was about to walk past the small composting toilet that stood inside a small room at the end of the hallway, I stopped. Shivers spread across my entire body, paralyzing me. Dad sat on the toilet. His gun still hung from his trigger finger, and his brain was splattered across the wall behind him. He had his journal on his lap, covered in blood. Josh! Dad yelled from the darkness. Help me! I was frozen in place, both by my fear and confusion, unable to make any decisions. Come on, Josh! Dad kept yelling. I need your help, son! My mind was racing. There was no way of knowing who was who. When I heard Dad's voice yelling for help while watching his dead body, nothing but absolute terror reverberated inside me. I slowly reached for the journal in Dad's lap and grabbed it, hoping it would shed some light on the situation. I was just about to open it when my sister screamed. I ran back, this time jumping over my doppelganger's body, and found her looking at something out the corner of the main chamber. I told you to, I said, but changed my mind. Are you okay? What happened? She cried. It's me! Crawled up in the corner was her naked, dead body. Her head had been twisted in such a way that the neck had been broken. There's something seriously wicked going on here, I said. Dad shot himself in the head a long time ago by the looks of it, and yet he keeps yelling for help. Let's get back to the car, now. We drove away from the bunker as fast as we could, leaving whatever was still alive down there yelling for help. My sister insisted on staying at my place for a few days. I didn't mind having her around. We shared an experience that no one else should relate to, and we needed each other to overcome the trauma. It took a day for me to build up the courage to open Dad's journal. It began with his usual deranged conspiracy theories. I flipped past them. At the end, he had only made short notes. Found a hidden door. Deep pit. Possible the remains of some old black project. Evelyn and Josh woke me up. A surprise visit. Didn't hear them enter. Strange. Had dinner with them. Something seems off. It isn't them. They tried to make me illegible. God help me, it isn't them. I shot the son of a bitch right between the eyes. Hiding in the bathroom now. This will probably be my last entry. God forgive me. Chills went down my spine as I read the last entry on the blood-drenched page. I never got the other one. She's still out there somewhere. I only got one bullet left. I won't allow her to do that abhorrent thing to me. Forgive me. My sister has been cooking for hours. She just called for me from the kitchen. Josh, come here. I want to show you something.
I can't believe Kermit the Frog would do that.
You know,
Did it sound like Kermit?
I didn't want to say it.
No, it sounded a little bit more like your,
Josh.
No, I'm just kidding. It sounded a little bit more like
Kermit.
the no. I was gonna say the George Lucas voice, but then again, anyway. Either way, that's a good story.
We had never had a funny character in Jar Jar Binks before. You know, we never had a better character in all Star Wars.
That's the true horror story right there.
Amazing.
No, that's good. I liked it.
That was a good one. I'm actually surprised by that.
Ooh, that was a good one. I was like, ooh, I gotta see where this one goes.
This feels like a thing that like Jordan Peele would have read and be just like, ah, yes, this is what I will make us. You know, he like read this and he's like, I have an idea.
Trying to decide at the very last minute if I want to switch.
You're trying to divine whether or not you've chosen my backup story, and you're trying to be like, do I want to do Stoker's?
Here to pause.
I mean, in this stream, we often hear the pause. They hit the floor. They go patta 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 patta.
Tippy tappy tippy tappy.
Okay. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. The Living History Project.
Oh, thank God that isn't mine. Okay, muting mode.
One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I've been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of, I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age, and my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent, old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. Go ahead, a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed toward the screen, then back to the man. I am here with my great-uncle Stephen, she began almost inaudibly. He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army. Great-Uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly once or twice. I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-Uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. Nope. Glad to get out of my town, though. Where'd you go? Balkans. Uh-huh, she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, Was Bacchus very different from here? Yes. Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-Uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. Uncle Stephen, she asked, what is your very worst memory from the army? The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of the chair. I'll be back, he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same except Great-Uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper and plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. I was a kid when I enlisted, he said, looking at Olivia. Your brother's age, he told her. Olivia nodded. I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. Felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake. Ahem! Mom's coughed. Great-Uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did. The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great-Uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not? I heard him bark in response. Then you better let me tell it how I want. Mom? Olivia chimed. Please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class? No, Mom, we're just handing it to the teacher. I'm sure he's heard the word shit before, Great-Uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact, but other than the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway, he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it, so I'm going to read it now. And then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement. A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed in to Great Uncle Stephen in his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire, but I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadja suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day, come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried taking Nadja to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home, and she died that night. After Nadja and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting as it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once, even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how much time passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course, since I first holed myself up. It has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work, so I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadja had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. Teacher never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know, and the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough to not disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but it does require a lot of maintenance. Floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have to work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with the money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time. Except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time I've been crying. I've been losing my mind without it. I've given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I'm writing this because the sunlight is starting to die, and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach. I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadja died. I am not long for this world. But before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadja and little Ludmilla in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen. Mom said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait, Olivia tripped. He said there's more. What'd you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia. Hi, Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly record the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, and even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful, and I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen, but Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard a distinct click of laughter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arm. The images that came to mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly, he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have gotten soaking wet, but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging, like this. I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio? Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there, all right. And it was still on.
I don't have
Oh,
any
is that
specific-
the end?
Yes, that's
I don't
it.
have a specific follow-up, but that was good.
The ending caught me a little abruptly.
Yeah, same.
Well, that one's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I needed like 2 more sentences to be like, the radio is still on. And the only thing you hear from it is somebody whistling and the sound of a broom on the floor.
All we could hear was this voice quietly chanting, "Cougars."
God damn it,
Okay.
Stoker! No!
Sir.
I absolutely knew you were going to do that. You little shit.
Beware the cougar. Anyway, okay.
We can skip your turn, Stoker.
How dare. Just look. Oh, I'm
You are
enjoying
getting
the
bopped.
chats. I'm enjoying the chat's reactions to this. Should have had your Googer counter. All right.
Yeah, Stoker, I'm
Okay.
gonna need you to stop that right there before I come over there and bitch slap you, alright?
Terrifying.
All right. This one this is gonna be practically a cold read. I just quickly skimmed this one in a panic. So if there are any mistakes, then it's all Jonas's fault.
Hey, all right, fine, go ahead.
Submitted for the approval. Because he's a kangaroo. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This story is called Nighty Night. For the past 5 years, it's just been Ian and me. My wife's pregnancy with him wasn't easy. There were a number of scares and close calls due to health issues that she had experienced all her life. Every doctor she had ever been to had told her that she would never be able to get pregnant in the first place. She put on a brave face and joked that she would just get an extra litter of puppies instead, an entire litter of puppies instead. But when she was thinking about it and didn't know I was watching, her real feelings were etched all over her face. She loved kids, and the thought of not being able to have one herself was heartbreaking for her. We discussed other options, of course, adoption, fostering, you name it, and we looked into it. We even had a meeting scheduled with an adoption agency when a miracle happened. That miracle was Ian. Against all the odds, Ellen became pregnant. Her doctors were at a complete loss. It should have been impossible, but suddenly there we were, talking about converting our second bedroom into a nursery and planning out how to shuffle around our work schedules to make sure that one of us was always home with the baby. The complications began about 4 months into the pregnancy. It seemed like every few weeks we were at the hospital while the staff ran tests or performed procedures. Ellen was amazing during all of it. I was acting like a complete lunatic, worried out of my mind about every little thing, but she would just lay there in the uncomfortable hospital bed, stroking her increasingly large belly and smiling to herself. She would tell me that she just knew that everything would work out in the end, and that all of the issues were just bumps in the road. She went into labor early, just a few days after the 31-week mark. She waddled into the kitchen and told me in a very calm and very matter-of-fact tone that the baby was coming. I had been getting ready for bed, so in that same collected manner, she retrieved the bag we had packed weeks earlier and the car keys while I frantically got dressed and grabbed the few necessary items that hadn't gone into the bag yet. 6 hours later, Ian was born. He was so small, and I could feel my heart sink as he emerged. The doctor immediately took him over to a radiant warmer table where he and the nurse began working with him. A second nurse kept me from getting too close to ensure that I didn't get in the way. The activity suddenly stopped, and the most wonderful sound filled the room. Our son started to cry. The doctor informed me that due to Ian's size, he would need to spend a couple of weeks in the newborn intensive care unit, but that from what he could see, the child would be fine. I remember feeling so relieved that I had to put a hand on the bed's footboard to steady myself. My fingers had just touched the plastic when the alarm on Ellen's monitor went off. Ian and I lost her in less than an hour. It wasn't anything that the hospital staff did wrong, and it wasn't anything that could have been prevented. The stress of the labor and birth had been too much for her, and she had suffered massive hemorrhaging. The staff did their absolute best to save her. It just wasn't possible. She never even got to hold Ian before she was gone. I never got a chance to mourn her. I was now a single parent, and all that mattered was that tiny little baby in the NICU. The next few weeks were spent going to work, getting through my shift, and immediately returning to the hospital to sit with Ian all night before doing it all over again. Shortly before he was released, I secured a position with a new company. It paid less, but it allowed me to work from home. Without much of a family support system, I needed to be there for him at all times. After all, it was just me and him now. I wish so much that Ellen could see this incredible child that we made together. He's loving, energetic, frustrating, confounding, and so much more. He's everything that we could have hoped for, and so much more. He also has a very vivid imagination for his age, which is partly why I didn't believe him when he first told me that he was being visited by something during the night. It took a while to get to this point, but we've settled into a routine each evening. We have dinner together, spend about an hour running around outside if the weather is nice, or playing inside if it isn't. Ian gets his bath, and then he lays down to sleep for the night. This routine is supposed to be finished around 8 o'clock each night, but if you have kids, you know that no routine is foolproof. On the first night that he was visited, I didn't manage to get him wrangled into bed until almost 9. I was catching up on work at my desk when I heard Ian yell for me. I'm ashamed to admit that my first reaction was to feel irritated. Normally, when he called out like that, it was to try to get one last drink of water or to tell me that he isn't tired and can't go to sleep. That would happen at least twice a week. I said that I have an incredible child, not one that wasn't prone to the usual 4-year-old tendencies. When he immediately cried out a second time, though, I stood up and pushed my chair back so hard that it tipped over. There was panic in his voice. I hurried up the short flight of stairs to the second floor and flung his door open, my hand immediately going for the light switch. Ian was sitting in his bed with tears streaming down his face. The left leg of his pajama pants was pulled up, and his hands were pressed down on the skin. The sheets and comforter from his bed were laying on the floor. His pillow was hanging halfway off the mattress. I hurried over to him and knelt down next to this bed, putting down the safety rail as I did so. He immediately flung his arms around my neck and started crying harder. The sobbing was so intense that he started to cough uncontrollably. I pried him off of me and held him in my lap to allow him to catch his breath. We sat there for a long time, him crying and sniffling loudly with me gently stroking his hair and telling him that everything was all right. When he finally calmed down, I sat him on the edge of his bed and took his hands away from his leg. There were 3 long scratches running down it. They weren't deep, but there were a few tiny beads of blood. I gently asked him what had happened. He remained silent. I asked him again, and this time he lifted his head to look me in the eyes. "Nighty Night hurt me," he told me in a tiny voice. I looked back at him in confusion. I don't know what I had expected him to say, but it certainly hadn't been that. "Nighty Night?" I asked softly. "Like what I tell you at night before you go to sleep?" "Nighty Night," Ian repeated, more forcefully this time. "He scratched me, like the bad cat did." Just after his 3rd birthday, he had been scratched by a neighbor's kitten while trying to play with it. The claws hadn't even punctured the skin, but the incident had stuck with him. "I'm sorry, big guy, I don't understand. Are you saying that Nighty Night is a cat?" "No cat. Nighty Night is a monster, Daddy. He hurt me." I looked back down at the scratches. They were obviously real, but just as obviously they hadn't been caused by any monster. Something else had happened. I want to make it clear that I never for a second thought that Ian was lying to me. Sure, he was prone to the occasional fib, just like any young child was, but he never lied to me about important things. Besides, he was too scared to be making up a story. Scooping Ian into my arms, I carried him into the bathroom and got the first aid kit out of the cabinet. As I sat down on the toilet and maneuvered him into my lap, I mentally slapped my forehead. The past few nights, I had forgotten to trim his fingernails when I had given him his bath. He must have scratched himself in his sleep. It had woken him up, and his still half-asleep mind must have interpreted the whole thing as a monster attacking him. I quickly bandaged the scratches before trimming his nails with a small silver clipper. He had calmed down by that point, and I gave him a hug before carrying him back to his room. When I went to put him down in bed, however, he held onto me so tightly that I nearly tipped forward. He absolutely refused to sleep in his bedroom that night. We ended up falling asleep together on the couch downstairs, and by the time the sun was up, he was back to his usual self. The events of the previous night seemed to be forgotten. It was Saturday, and because I didn't have to work on the weekends, I took Ian to a local state park. We spent the entire day playing on the playground and splashing around in the lake. By the time we left the park and headed home, we were both exhausted. He fell asleep in his car seat just a few minutes away from the house. I carried him inside and up to his bed. He remained passed out through the entire process. I planned to let him sleep for an hour or so. He still needed to have dinner, and I knew that if he napped for too long, it would be almost impossible to get him down that night. I kicked off my shoes and flopped down in a chair to enjoy the momentary silence. That silence didn't last long. It was shattered by Ian's screaming. It wasn't a yelp or crying out like it had been the previous night. This was a full scream, one filled with pain and terror. I yelled his name as I leaped up the stairs and burst into the room. Ian was seated on the floor, his thumb in his mouth and his eyes watery. He was rocking back and forth slowly. He looked up at me with a blank expression, as if he knew that I was there, but my presence didn't mean anything to him. I picked him up, and as I did so, I felt something warm and wet on my hand. I pulled it away from his back and saw that there was blood on my fingers. Just as I had the night before, I carried him into the bathroom and turned on the light. I immediately saw his back reflecting off the mirror over the sink, and I felt like ice was poured into my veins. Pieces of his shirt were torn away, and the shreds that remained were red with blood. I sat Ian on the counter and lifted the shirt up over his head. He was unresponsive during the entire process, and the part of me that was still thinking clearly wondered if he was in shock. On his back were 3 cuts, each of them spaced roughly the same distance as the scratches on his leg. These were much deeper than those, and they were bleeding freely. I bandaged them as fast as I could before taking him downstairs and back out to the car. The cuts were too much for my basic first aid skills. He needed a doctor. The drive to the hospital was torture. I padded his car seat as much as I could with a blanket to try to take pressure off his back, but he started screaming in pain before we got very far. Knowing full well that it was illegal, I pulled over, unstrapped him, and set him down in the passenger seat with him sitting sideways before getting back in and continuing to drive. Maybe that was the wrong call. I honestly don't know. All I know is that I couldn't stand for him to be in agony like that. The nurse behind the emergency room desk immediately waved us through the door when she saw Ian's back through the window. She ran off to get the doctor while I carefully sat him down on the nearby gurney. I hugged him as best as I could without touching his back and told him that everything was going to be okay. "I know it hurts, little man, but I have to ask you something," I told him, giving him a reassuring smile. "What happened?" "Nighty night," he replied immediately in a matter-of-fact voice. "Nighty night hurt me." I didn't have time to question him further. The doctor arrived, and she took one look at Ian's back before telling a nurse to wheel him into a nearby examination room. I went to follow, but the doctor told me that she thought it was best if I waited outside. Her eyes were looking past me as she spoke, and when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw that she was looking at a security guard standing at the far end of the hallway. If I had been thinking straight, I would have understood what was happening, but at the time I was too worried about Ian to figure out what that look meant. The doctor went into the examination room as the nurse came back out. She put her hand on my arm and gently led me away from the door. I protested, of course, but she made it clear that I had to come with her and answer some questions before I would be able to see Ian. She started by asking me if there were any pets or animals in the house, to which I replied that there weren't. She then asked if we had been with anyone else when his injuries had occurred. When I told her that we hadn't, she followed up by inquiring if I had been drinking that day. That was the moment that I started catching on. The hospital staff was trying to determine if I had been the one that had hurt my son. At some point during the conversation, a man in a gray suit entered the hallway and came to a stop next to us. He introduced himself as a social worker, and he stated that it was his job to make sure that Ian was safe and got the best care possible. He asked his own set of questions, and I answered them as best I could, but I was sure that he wasn't really believing me. It didn't help that I couldn't tell him what had happened because I had no idea myself. Sometime later, the doctor came back out of the room and informed me that while one of the cuts had been shallow enough to bandage, the other two had required stitches. To say that I was irate was an understatement. I wasn't upset that she had done what was medically necessary. I was angry that I had been kept out of the room the entire time instead of being in there to comfort him during the process. She stood there calmly as I yelled, and once I had said my piece and was winding down, she told me that she was recommending that Ian stay at the hospital overnight for observation. After taking a long breath, I asked as calmly as I could if I would be able to stay with him. She didn't answer, but the social worker did. He told me in a clearly practiced tone that due to the nature of the injuries, he was going to take Ian into his custody for the night while he worked to determine the nature of the injuries. His tone might have been pleasant and measured, but the implication behind his words was very clear. "You think that I hurt Ian," I said, fighting back a second wave of anger. "I would never hurt my son. If you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you—" "That's enough," the social worker snapped, cutting me off. "You need to stop right there. I haven't made a determination one way or another on if I think you did this. I will say that I've met a lot of abusive fathers in my time, and you don't strike me as one of them. I have policies and protocols that I have to follow, though. What's best for everyone involved is if you go home for the night, get some sleep, and let me do my job so that we can put this behind us." He had caught me off guard. I stared at him for a long moment before nodding once. Anything I did other than what he told me to would only jeopardize my situation. And even though the thought of being apart from Ian for a night made me sick, the thought of him being taken away permanently was much worse. I nodded again, and he patted me on the arm. He told me to come back in the morning and to ask for him at the desk before turning to go into the examination room. As he opened the door, I clearly heard Ian call out for me. I left the hospital feeling as if my entire world was burning before my eyes. I went home and immediately marched up to Ian's room. I was determined to figure out what had happened to him. The scratches on his leg could have been explained away by him causing them in his sleep, but the cuts on his back were another matter. He couldn't have reached that area of his body. Even if he could have, there was no way that he could have made markings that deep. Something else had happened. I tore apart his room looking for answers. A loose screw or nail that he had leaned up against, a broken piece of bed that I hadn't noticed, a toy with something protruding, anything. I examined every inch of the room from top to bottom. I came up empty. There was nothing that I could find that could have caused his injuries. Defeated, I leaned up against the wall and slid down to the floor. Something caught my eye, and I reached over to pick up a small stuffed duck. Its yellow cloth had faded, and overall it looked a bit worse for wear, but I could still easily identify it as the first toy that Ellen had bought for Ian. It had been right after we had found out that she was pregnant. She had named it Mr. Quackers, an absurd name for an absurd-looking duck. The events of the day caught up with me, and I started to nod off. I felt my eyelids growing heavier with each heartbeat. This was good, I reasoned. I would get some sleep, then be at the hospital the moment the sun began to rise. That was when I saw the creature standing in the corner of the room. One moment, there was nothing there, and the next, there it was, its extremely tall gray body bent over as it pushed up against the ceiling. Its limbs were extremely long and thin for the creature's size. The two arms ended in 3 needle-like fingers that had to have extended at least 3 feet from the hands. Stretched out on its elongated neck was its face. Its lips, dry and cracked and missing entire chunks in some places, were pulled back in an eternal grin that exposed its oversized white teeth. The lidless eyes were black in the center, and the areas that on a person would have been white were the dried yellow color of old parchment. Dark ichor that had pooled in its jaws slowly dripped onto the floor as it watched me. "Nighty night," the creature rasped out. My entire body jumped as I snapped back to full consciousness. The creature was gone again, with no trace that it had even been there in the first place. The spots where the ichor had splattered onto the floor had vanished. I sat there on the floor, alone in the room, with my pulse racing and my breath coming in short gasps. I could have attempted to rationalize what I had seen. It probably would have been easy enough to convince myself that I had imagined it, that it was a trick of the light, that my nearly unconscious mind had twisted into a horrifying vision. That was a perfectly rational explanation. The problem was that I had seen it. I knew that it had been real. There was no question about it in my mind. It was impossible, but I was sure that it had been occupying the corner of the room across from me seconds earlier. My breathing slowed, and my panic was slowly replaced by nausea as a realization came to me. Ian had also seen this creature. It had stood over my 4-year-old son with that nightmarish face. It had then proceeded to hurt him not once, but twice. If I was this scared, I couldn't fathom how frightened he had been. Nighty night, Ian had called it nighty night. It must have said the same thing to him that it had said to me. I got up off of the floor and left the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I stood in the hall for a moment before rushing into the bathroom and throwing up in the toilet. It went on for quite some time, so long that I started to wonder if it would ever stop. When it finally did, I collapsed against the bathtub, lightheaded and close to passing out. There was a thud from inside of Ian's room. I lifted my head as best as I could and looked out through the bathroom doorway. I managed to focus my eyes just in time to see the knob on the bedroom door start to turn. There was an audible click, and the door slowly swung open. Nighty Night's face took up much of the bedroom doorway as it grinned at me. I tried to stand up, but I was too weak from throwing up to manage it. I could only watch as Nighty Night pressed its head against the wood frame. It was too large to make it through the opening. My feeling of relief was only momentary. Nighty Night started to push its head harder. Its face stretched back as the head slowly began to force its way through. It was like watching rubber being forced through a hole. "Nighty night," it rasped, the voice coming out distorted through the stretched lips. I had to leave, and I had to do so quickly. More of the monster's head was making it through the doorway every second, and it wouldn't be long before it was free of the room's confines. Ignoring my aches and pains, I forced myself into a standing position. My head swam, and once again I was sure that I was going to pass out, but somehow I was able to barely remain conscious. Nighty Night's face was almost all the way through the doorway now. I stumbled into the hallway and pressed myself up against the wall opposite from the creature. Being as careful as I could, I moved past it, feeling its hot breath on me as I did so. Its teeth were mere inches away from my body. I made it through the thin opening and hurried down the stairs. My foot caught on the last step. It wasn't enough to make me lose my balance entirely, but it did trip me up, and I stumbled forward before falling over the side of the couch. My head struck one of the armrests. I must have blacked out. I don't remember doing so, but the next thing I knew I was being awoken by the sound of knocking. I sat up on the couch and immediately regretted doing so, as the worst headache I'd ever had greeted me. The knocking continued. It took me a few seconds to figure out that someone was banging on the front door. I stood up and took 2 steps towards the door before I remembered what had happened. I looked up the stairs, expecting to see Nighty squeezing its way down the hallway towards me, but the creature was gone. Still a bit dazed and not sure what else to do, I continued over to the front door and opened it. Standing on the other side was a large man in a police uniform. He was holding a clipboard under his arm and a pen in one hand. He nodded at me but didn't smile. He asked me my name and I gave it to him. He informed me that he was here at the request of the social worker from the hospital and that he would like to inspect my son's room. I moved aside and let him into the house. I closed the door behind him and led him up the stairs. I didn't want to go anywhere near the 2nd floor after what I had experienced, but if I didn't comply with his request, it would undoubtedly impact my chances of getting Ian back as soon as possible. I took him to the still open bedroom door and we went inside. Nighty wasn't there, of course. The officer took the clipboard out from under his arm and asked me a few questions, and I answered them as best as I could. He scribbled some notes on the paper as I spoke. Seemingly satisfied with my responses, he then got down on one knee and examined the safety rail that ran along the sides of Ian's bed. "Have you done anything in this room since you brought your son into the hospital?" the officer asked. I looked around to try to figure out what had happened, I told him. "Okay, but did you change the bed sheets or anything like that?" "What? No. I just moved things around and put them back. I didn't change the sheets." The officer nodded. "Well, it looks like Mr. Eaton was right." "Mr. Eaton?" "The social worker assigned to your son. See here? There's no blood on the sheets, but there are 3 streaks along the safety rail. They match up to where the poles are on the rail. Mr. Eaton thinks that your son tried to get out of bed while he was still out of it and slid over the rail. He must have caught the poles just right through the fabric and they dug into him. Cute kid, by the way. He said that he was going nighty-night and that his back started feeling ouchy when he got out of bed. Eaton put things together from there." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The theory was wrong, and Ian's words had been completely misinterpreted. The blood trails and the spacing of the rail poles were pure coincidence. It was all working completely in my favor, though. "Good thing, too," he continued. "If he hadn't figured it out, or if I had found anything to prove him wrong here, we'd be having a very different conversation right now." Seemingly satisfied with everything, the officer left and went back to his car. I watched him through the window as he pulled out and headed down the street. The sun was starting to come up over the trees, and I could hear the family of robins in the front yard chirping. I decided that it was close enough to morning to go to the hospital and get my son back. It went smoother than I had expected. The social worker had me fill out some quick paperwork so that they had my statements for the record, and after that he led me to a patient room on the opposite side of the hospital. He had barely opened the door for me when Ian came running up to me barefoot with his little hospital gown waving behind him and practically jumped into my arms. He hugged me tightly, and, being careful to avoid the white bandages covering his stitched cuts, I hugged him back. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity, me crying and him telling me all about his stay in the hospital. That was 2 months ago. The house that I raised Ian in is currently for sale, and my realtor tells me that there are a number of people interested, even though it hasn't been listed very long. A seller's market, she calls it. I've only been back twice since that night, once to pick up our clothes and other necessary items, and once to pack the remainder of our belongings and put them into storage. Both times were during the middle of the day, and each time I made arrangements for Ian to stay with someone instead of accompanying me. We've been living in a hotel on the other side of town. My long-term plan is for us to move far away, possibly all the way to the coast. I want to put as much distance between us and this place as possible. Last week, I read a newspaper article in the local paper about an officer that killed his wife. According to the report, he had said he had just started to doze off one night when a giant monster appeared in his room. He grabbed the gun that he kept in his nightstand and fired off 5 shots at it. The monster disappeared, but his wife had been walking into the room at the time, and 2 of the bullets struck her, killing her almost instantly. No one believed him, of course. How could they possibly have? It was a ludicrous story. He seemed so convinced that he was telling the truth that a psychological evaluation was ordered before formal charges were filed. 3 days later, he was found dead in his cell. Not just dead, but damn near decapitated. The police are baffled. He was alone in his cell, and there was nothing he could have used to do that to himself. The guards think that one of the other prisoners got in and did the job. Former cops don't have a lot of friends in jail, after all. They're at a loss to explain just how a prisoner could have gotten into the cell and caused so much damage without alerting anyone. This was the same officer that had come to my house. I know what happened to him. It was the same thing that almost happened to both myself and my son. It was Nighty Night. I think that I've got the creature's appearing and disappearing act figured out. I was on the verge of becoming unconscious both times that I saw it. The first time I was almost asleep, and the second time I was trying not to pass out. When I actually did black out, it didn't harm me. The officer said in his statement that he was falling asleep when he saw the monster in his room. I think Nighty Night exists in that ever so brief moment between awake and asleep. When you enter into that moment, you can see it, and it can look right back at you. Or maybe I'm wrong and it's always there, watching and waiting until it can come for you in that short time where your world and its are connected. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I doubt that I ever will. Knowing exactly what Ian had gone through might provide more insight, but it doesn't matter. I refuse to ask him about it. He's sleeping through the night now that his wounds have mostly healed, and I'm not going to dredge up bad memories that could only hurt him. He deserves to be safe and protected from things both natural and unnatural. He's been through enough already. I'm afraid that he's going to be through even more before this is all over. Last night, as I watched him sleeping on the bed in our hotel room, I started to drift off in the uncomfortable chair in the corner of the room. I was just about out when I heard something through the glass window to my right. It was faint, as if coming from quite a distance away, but I recognized it immediately. Nighty Night! The raspy voice called out in the darkness. I jerked awake and immediately stood up to start packing our things, being careful not to wake Ian up as I did so. He needed his rest. We were going to be on the road for a long, long time.
Oh man.
Nighty Night. Nice.
And before anyone says it, I know that the official dictionary pronunciation of the word is Ichor, not Ichor. However, the dictionary is wrong. It should be pronounced Ichor because it's an ickier sound.
It is an ickier sound. I'm right with you on that.
Here's what I'll say. The Ichor is the blood of the gods. Ichor is the black tarry stuff that monsters are made of.
See? There you go. There you go.
Ichor is the thing that killed Tasha Yar.
Ichor's the thing.
God. All right. I believe
that was good.
Yeah. Hello, Void. How are you doing?
Yo!
Oh, Void! When did you come in? Actually, I heard someone join the call.
It was me.
It was Void all along.
All along. I was Nighty Night.
Oh no.
Not this.
Voice the Google confirmed.
Oh no.
Welcome, Void. Welcome to the Midnight Society. May we induct you into service of providing the spoops.
I would be honored. Did you guys bring the weird salt stuff that makes the flame shoot up around the campfire?
Yeah, it flows through my veins.
Wow. Is that?
I left the fireworks salts at home.
Let's
Wait, I'm at home right now.
away from the fire.
Yeah, this is how I keep people from being tempted to set me on fire.
And how's that been working for you?
Well, I'm not on fire.
It sounds like it worked then.
I don't know.
All right, Void. You may start off and read us a story. You may introduce it as, for the approval of the Midnight Society, I submit, and then you may say the title of your piece.
Oh man, let me get a drink of water here. Whew.
No pressure, but it has to be mind blowing.
Might want to boost like +5, maybe just a little bit.
+5?
Yeah, I mean just a smidge. You're fine though.
Oh, should I turn myself up? Should I increase the volume?
Yes.
Up the jam, pump it.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Just a little bit. Just a little. It's just a little bit. Give a little bit of input volume. How's that?
That's good. That's good.
Oh yeah. Gives me the tingles.
Oh, great group. I submit my submission for the approval of the Midnight Society. I bring you all a classic short story, The Moon-Bog, by H.P. Lovecraft. Somewhere, to what remote and fearsome region I know not, Dennis Barry has gone. I was with him the last night he lived among men, and heard his screams when the thing came to him. But all the locals and police in County Meath would never find him, or the others, though they searched long and far. And now I shudder when I hear the frogs piping in swamps, or see the moon in lonely places. I had known Dennis Barry well in America, where he had grown rich and had congratulated him when he brought back the old castle by the bog at sleepy Kildare. It was from Kildare that his father had come, and it was there that he wished to enjoy his wealth among ancestral scenes. Men of his blood had once ruled over Kildare and built and dwelt in the castle, but those days were very remote, so that for generations the castle had been empty and decaying. After he went to Ireland, Barry wrote me often, and told me how under his care the Grey Castle was rising tower by tower to its ancient splendor. How the ivy was climbing slowly over the restored walls as it had climbed so many centuries ago, and how the locals blessed him for bringing back the old days with his gold from over the sea. But in time there came troubles, and the locals ceased to bless him and fled away instead as from a doom. And then he sent a letter and asked me to visit him, for he was lonely in the castle with no one to speak to, save the new servants and laborers he had brought from the north. The bog was the cause of all these troubles, as Barry told me the night I came to the castle. I had reached Kildare in the summer sunset, as the gold of the sky lighted the green of the hills and groves and the blue of the bog, where, on the far islet, a strange olden ruin glistened spectrally. The sunset was very beautiful, but the locals at Ballylow had warned me against it and said that Kildare had some accursed, so that I almost shuddered to see the high turrets of the castle gilded with fire. Barry's motor had met me at Ballylow station, for Kildare's off the railway. The villagers had shunned the car and the driver from the north, but had whispered to me with pale faces when they saw I was going to Kildare. And that night, after our reunion, Barry told me why. The locals had gone from Kildare because Dennis Barry was to drain the Great Bog. For all his love of Ireland, America had not left him untouched. And he hated the beautiful wasted space where peat might be cut and land opened up. The legends and superstitions of Kildare did not move him, and he laughed when the locals first refused to help, and then cursed him and went away to Ballylow with their few belongings as they saw his determination. In their place, he sent for laborers from the north, and when the servants left, he replaced them likewise. But it was lonely among strangers, so Barry had asked me to come. When I heard the fears which had driven the people from Kildare, I laughed as loudly as my friend had laughed, for these fears were some of the vaguest, wildest, and most absurd character. They had to do with some preposterous legend of the bog, and of a grim guardian spirit that dwelt in the strange olden ruin of the far islet I had seen in the sunset. There were tales of dancing lights in the dark of the moon, and of chill winds when the night was warm, of wraiths in white hovering over the waters, and of an imagined city of stone deep below the swampy surface. But foremost among the weird fancies, and alone in the absolute unanimity, was that of the curse awaiting him who should dare to touch or drain the vast reddish morass. There were secrets, said the locals, which must not be uncovered. Secrets that had lain hidden since the plague came to the children of Partholon in those fabulous years beyond history. In the Book of Invaders, it is told that these sons of the Greeks were all buried at Tello, but old men in Kildare said that one city was overlooked, saved by its patron moon goddess, so that only the wooded hills buried it, save the men of Med swept down from Scythia in their 30 ships. Such were the idle tales which had made the villagers leave Kildare, and when I heard them, I did not wonder that Dennis Barry had refused to listen. He had, however, a great interest in antiquities, and proposed to explore the bog thoroughly when it was drained. The white ruins on the islet he had often visited, but through their age was plainly great, and their contour very little like that of most ruins in Ireland. They were too dilapidated to tell the days of their glory. Now, the work of drainage was ready to begin, and the laborers from the north were soon to strip the forbidden bog of its green moss and red heather, and kill the tiny shell-paved streamlets and quiet blue pools fringed with rushes. After Barry told me these things, I was very drowsy, for the travels of the day have been wearying, and my host had talked late into the night. A manservant shooed me to my room, which was in a remote tower overlooking the village, and the plain at the edge of the bog, and the bog itself, so that I could see from my windows in the moonlight the silent roofs from which the locals had fled, and which now sheltered the laborers from the north, and, too, the parish church with its antique spire. And far out across the brooding bog, the remote olden ruin on the islet gleaming white and spectral. Just as I dropped to sleep, I fancied I heard faint sounds coming from the distance. Sounds wild and half musical, and stirred me with a great excitement which colored my dreams. Let me increase the attack on that. Let's pitch it down. Let's make it creepy. But when I had awakened the next morning, I felt it had been all a dream. For the visions I had seen were most wonderful than any sound of wild pipes in the night. Influenced by the legends that Barry had related, my mind, and in slumber, hovered around a stately city in a green valley where marble streets and statues, villas and temples, carvings and inscriptions all spoke in certain tones the glory that was Greece. When I told this dream to Barry, we both laughed. But I laughed the louder because he was perplexed about his laborers from the north. For the 6th time, they all overslept, waking very slowly and dazedly, and acting as if they had not rested, although they were known to have gone early to bed the night before. The morning and afternoon, I wandered alone through the sun-gilded village and talked now and then with idle laborers. For Barry was busy with the final plans for beginning his work of drainage. The laborers were not as happy as they might have been, for most of them seemed uneasy over some dream which they had had, yet which they tried in vain to remember. I told them of my dream, but they were not interested till I spoke of the weird sounds that I thought I had heard. Then they looked oddly at me and said that they seemed to remember weird sounds too. In the evening, Barry dined with me and announced that he would like to begin the drainage in 2 days. I was glad, for although I disliked to see the moss and the heather and the little streams and lakes depart, I had a growing wish to discern the ancient secrets the deep matted peat might hide. And that night my dreams of piping flutes and marble percentiles came to a sudden and disquieting end. For upon the city in the valley I saw pestilence descend, and then a frightful avalanche of wooded slopes that covered the dead bodies in the streets and left unburied only the temple of Artemis on the high peak, where the aged moon priestess Clace lay cold and silent in a crown of ivory on her silver head. I have said that I awaked suddenly and in alarm. For some time I could not tell whether I was waking or sleeping, for the sound of flutes still rang shrilly in my ears. But when I saw on the floor the icy moonbeams and outlines of the lattice Gothic window, I decided I must be awake and in the castle at Kildare. Then I heard a clock from the remote landing below strike the hour of 2, and I knew I was awake. Yet still came that monotonous piping from afar, wild and weird airs that made me think of some dance of fauns on distant Menelaus. It would not let me sleep, and in impatience I sprang up and paced the floor. Only by chance did I go to the north window and look out on the silent village and the plain at the edge of the bog. I had no wish to gaze abroad, for I wanted to sleep, but the flutes tormented me, and I had to do or see something. How could I have suspected the thing I was to behold? There, in the moonlight that flooded the spacious plain, was a spectacle which no mortal, having seen it, could ever forget. To the sound of reedy pipes that echoed over the bog, there glided silently and eerily a mixed throng of swaying figures, reeling through such a revel as the Sicilians may have danced to Demeter in the old days under the harvest moon beside the Kine. The wild plain, the golden moonlight, the shadowy moving of forms, and above all the shrill, monotonous piping produced an effect which almost paralyzed me. Yet I noted amidst the fear that half of these tireless mechanical dancers were the laborers whom I had thought asleep, whilst the others half were strange, airy beings in white, half indeterminate in nature, but suggesting pale, wistful naiads from the haunted fountains of the bog. I do not know how long I gazed at this sight from the lonely turret window before I dropped suddenly in a dreamless swoon, out of which the high sun of morning aroused me. We've reached our halfway point in the story, ladies and gentlemen. I am very interested to see where it goes next. My first impulse on awaking was to communicate all my fears and observations to Dennis Barry, but as I saw the sunlight glowing through the latticed east window, I became sure that there was no reality in what I thought I had seen. I am given to strange phantasms, yet as never weak enough to believe in them. So on this occasion, contented myself with questioning the laborers, who slept very late and recalled nothing of the previous night save misty dreams of shrill sounds. This matter of the spectral piping harassed me greatly, and I wondered if the crickets of autumn had come before their time to vex the night and haunt the visions of men. Later in the day, I watched Barry in the library poring over his plans for the great work which had begun on the morrow, and for the first time felt a touch of the same kind of fear that had driven the locals away. For some unknown reason, I dreaded the thought of disturbing the ancient bog and its sunless secrets, and pictured terrible sights lying black under the unmeasured depth of age-old peat. That these secrets should be brought to light seemed injudicious, and I began to wish for an excuse to leave the castle and village. I went so far as to talk casually to Barry on the subject, but did not dare continue after he gave his resounding laugh. So I was silent when the sun set fulgently over the far hills and Kildare blazed all red and gold in a flame that seemed a portent. Whether the events of that night were of reality or illusion, I shall never ascertain. Certainly they transcend anything we dream of in nature and the universe, yet in no normal fashion can I explain those disappearances which were known to all men after it was over. I retired early and full of dread, and for a long time could not sleep in the uncanny silence of the tower. It was very dark, for although the sky was clear, the moon was now well in the wane. It would not rise till the small hours. I thought, as I lay there, of Dennis Barry, and of what would befall the bog when the day came, and found myself almost frantic with an impulse to rush out into the night, take Barry's car, and drive madly to Ballylow out of the menaced lands. But before my fears could crystallize into action, I had fallen asleep, and gazed in dreams upon the city in the valley, cold and dead under a shroud of hideous shadow. Probably it was the shrill piping that awaked me, yet that piping was not what I noticed first when I opened my eyes. I was lying with my back to the east window overlooking the bog, where the waning moon would rise, and therefore expected to see the light cast on the opposite wall before me. But I had not looked for such a light as now appeared. Light indeed glowed on the panels ahead, but it was not any light that the moon gives. Terrible and piercing was the shaft of ruddy refulgence that steamed through the Gothic window, and the whole chamber was brilliant with a splendor intense and unearthly. My immediate actions were peculiar for such a situation, but it is only in tales that a man does the dramatic and unforeseen thing. Instead of looking out across the bog toward the source of the new light, I kept my eyes from the window in panic, fear, and clumsily drew on my clothing with some dazed idea of escape. I remember seizing my revolver and hat, but before it was over, I had lost them both without firing the one or donning the other. After a time, the fascination of the red radiance overcame my fright, and I crept to the east window and looked out whilst the maddening, incessant piping whined and reverberated through the castle and all over the village. Over the bog was a deluge of flaring light, scarlet and sinister, and pouring from that strange olden ruin off the far islet. The aspect of that ruin I cannot describe. I must have been mad, for it seemed to rise majestic and undecayed, splendid and column cinctured, the flame reflecting marble off its entablature, piercing the sky like the apex of a temple on a mountaintop. Flutes shrieked and drums began to beat, and as I watched in awe and terror, I thought I saw dark, sultan forms silhouetted grotesquely against the vision of marble and effulgence. The effect was titanic, altogether unthinkable, and I might have stared indefinitely had not the sound of the piping seemed to grow stronger at my left, the trembling with a terror oddly mixed with the ecstasy. I crossed the circular room to the north window, from which I could see the village and the plain at the edge of the bog. There my eyes dilated again with a wild wonder as great as if I had not just turned from the scene beyond the pale of nature. For on the ghastly red litten plain was moving a procession of beings in such a manner as none ever saw before, save in nightmares. Half gliding, half floating in the air, the white-clad bog wraiths were slowly retreating toward the still waters, and the island ruined fantastic formations, suggesting some ancient and solemn ceremonial dance. Their waving translucent arms, guided by the detestable piping of those unseen flutes, it beckoned an uncanny rhythm to a throng of lurching laborers who followed dog-like with blind, brainless, floundering steps, as if dragged by a clumsy but resistless demon will. As the naiads neared the bog without altering their course, a new line of stumbling stragglers zigzagged drunkenly out of the castle from some door far below my window, groped sightlessly across the courtyard and through the intervening bit of village, and joined the floundering column of the laborers on the plain. Despite their distance below me, I at once knew they were the servants brought from the north, for I recognized the ugly and unwieldy form of the cook, whose very absurdness had now become unutterably tragic. The flutes, they piped horribly, and again I heard the beating of drums from the direction of the island ruin. Then silently and gracefully, the naiads reached the water and melted one by one into the ancient bog, while the line of followers, never checking their speed, splashed awkwardly after them and vanished amidst a tiny vortex of unwholesome bubbles which I could barely see in the scarlet light. And as the last pathetic straggler sank heavily out of sight in the sullen pool, the flutes and the drums grew silent, and the blinding red rays of the ruins snapped instantaneously out, leaving the village of doom lone and desolate in wan beams of a new risen moon. My condition was now one of indescribable chaos. not knowing whether I was mad or sane, sleeping or waking. I was saved only by a merciful numbness. I believe I did ridiculous things, such as offering prayers to Artemis, Latona, Demeter, Persephone, and Pluton. All that I recalled of a classic youth came to my lips, and the horrors of the situation roused my deepest superstitions. I felt that I had witnessed the death of a whole village, and I knew I was alone in the castle with Dennis Barry, whose boldness had brought down a doom. As I thought of him, new terrors convulsed me, and I fell to the floor. Not fainting, but physically helpless. Then I felt the icy blast from the east window where the moon had risen, and began to hear the shrieks in the castle far below me. Soon those shrieks had attained a magnitude and quality which cannot be written of, and which make me faint as I think of them. All I can say is that they came from something I had known as a friend. At some time during this shocking period, the cold wind and the screaming must have roused me. For my next impression is of racing madly through the inky rooms and corridors and out across the courtyard into the hideous night. They found me at dawn, wandering mindless near Ballylow, but what unhinged me utterly was not any of the horrors I had seen or heard before. What I muttered about as I came slowly out of the shadows was a pair of fantastic incidents which occurred in my flight, incidents of no significance, yet which haunt me unceasingly when I am alone in certain marshy places or in the moonlight. As I fled from that accursed castle along the bog's edge, I heard a new sound, common yet unlike any I had heard before at Kildare. The stagnant waters, lately quite devoid of animal life, now teemed with a horde of slimy, enormous frogs, which piped shrilly and incessantly in tones strangely out of keeping with their size. They glistened, bloated and green in the moonbeams, which seemed to gaze up at the fount of light. I followed the gaze of one very fat and ugly frog and saw the second of the things which drove my senses away. Stretching directly from the strange olden ruin on the far islet to the waning moon, my eyes seemed to trace a beam of faint, quivering radiance having no reflection in the waters of the bog. And upward, along that pallid path, my fevered fancy pictured a thin shadow slowly writhing. A vague, contorted shadow struggling as if drawn by unseen demons. Crazed as I was, I saw in that awful shadow a monstrous resemblance, a nauseous, unbelievable caricature, a blasphemous effigy of whom had been Dennis Barry. Thank you, Midnight Society.
Wow.
Hey,
Well,
Give it
shit,
up.
now we've ruined everything. How are we ever supposed to follow that up?
Way to show us all up by including music.
That was incredible.
Excellent, though. That was
Thank you.
very excellent. That
Aw,
would have been
Iron
like
here.
something I would have heard on the radio.
Oh, shucks.
Oh my gosh, that was fantastic.
It was fantastic. Yes.
Also, freaking Lovecraft. As soon as freaking Lovecraft. As soon as he said he showed me to his room, but I knew Lovecraft is like he shooed me to his room. I'm like, you freaking nerd with your intentionally archaic spelling.
Oh God, no! His
he does
choice
that
words.
all the time. He has to put the A back into demonic and add like another syllable to make it demoniacal. Like he cannot help himself.
I'm quirky and eclectic.
Freaking Lovecraft, I swear.
Oh man.
So what you guys think? It's a pretty alright story, right?
Yeah. It's a pretty fun story and wonderfully racism free for Lovecraft's work.
A little thing there about the workers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, still, that's practically progressive compared to some of his stories.
I always picture him like he's like, Hunter the Typewriter. Like, I don't know how to describe this. I'll just say it was indescribable. It was so horrifying that I couldn't describe it. Anyway.
I always like to imagine that what he's seeing in his mind's eye and his imagination is just something that he cannot possibly put into words. Good times though. That was
I'll let your imagination do the work.
Yeah, let you.
And your trip to the thesaurus do the rest.
All right. Well,
so
it's now the past Midnight Society.
Yeah. GC, do you need to sleep, or did we? Is this too late for you, or?
I think honestly, looking
Yeah.
over,
I think GC will be opening us next week then.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, actually, it is a perfect way to end the night too, because I'm at the top of the list. So next week I'll be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
On
Thanks for
Halloween,
being
we'll
a
start,
us off
over
and then
from the
jump
start.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, sorry to cut you off there, GC, but
Hey, no problem. I loved it. It was a great night.
well,
It
thank
was.
you.
It was
Yeah,
wonderful.
Now we're all gonna have to have like sound effects and accompaniment and shit. I mean,
The only sound effect that I will use in my next story is the sad trombone.
I'm gonna bring a violin.
Yeah.
Oh, GC violins.
Violin.
GC violins never solves anything.
I could bring back the mood boards.
If someone
Do
dies,
it.
you can bring a violin. Yeah, I can't play violin.
Well, why not? You're full of cat guts.
Yeah, my whiskers can probably do it.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you to everyone who came out tonight. Especially thank you to our special guests, Miffix, Rage, and Void.
Oh yeah.
Oh, shucks.
Well, thank you for
Yeah,
having me. I'm glad I was
Go.
finally able to make it to one of these.
People, go follow Miffix. There's a shout out. Go follow Miffix on Twitch. And Void,
Yeah,
you have a
seriously.
Twitch.
I do have a Twitch. Let me grab a link to that. And I'll throw it into the chat. If I can. If I
Can you?
I don't know. I'm not logged in right now. I'll just throw it into
How do I
the
do the shout
Discord.
out? It's Void Quail on Twitch, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I just threw a link into the Discord.
Oh, it's got a cooldown.
Yes,
You're
I
a
was gonna warn you
cooldown.
about that on the shoutouts. That makes you do a cooldown in between them.
How rude.
I'm like, yeah, how rude! I want to shout out everybody.
Shout them all out.
And Rage, your Twitch name is Enraged Hybrid, right?
Yep, I can throw that link there for you.
Let it all out.
Yeah,
Sure.
outside of doing dramatic
Yeah.
readings, I like to do little maps, little D&D things.
Oh my god, I love your maps.
Ah, sure.
Yeah.
Everyone, go follow them.
Yeah.
Go say hi. Go check out their streams as well. But for tonight, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for listening to our stories. We hope to see you next week. And in 2 weeks, our Halloween Nights show.
Oh, snizzle snap.
Right, the spookiest spoops.
The spookiest of spooks.
Did I already take this?
Best time of October.
No, I didn't
Come
take
to
this.
me.
Dang it.
So thank you all for coming out. Thank you for all the stories. And now I would like to call this session of the Midnight Society to a close.
All right, pour the water bucket over me.
It's not like fucking challenge.
Yeah, Stoker,
right.
where's your donation to ALS?
Pour the bucket over me, cause I'm smoking.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good night,
Good
everybody.
night to that.
Good night.